Mist clung to the hills like a secret, curling around ancient stones that had seen centuries pass in silence. In that trembling dawn, a girl of noble blood wandered barefoot through the dew-soaked forest, her hair tangled with the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. The world whispered to her in a language older than kingdoms, older than the legions that marched from the south. She did not yet know that she was the heir of defiance, that the pulse of destiny beat through her veins in rhythm with the rivers and forests of her homeland. Her cradle had been lined with the spoils of 1,000 generations, torques of gold, rings etched with symbols no scholar could fully decipher, and the quiet hum of druidic chants that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. As a child, she had listened with wide eyes to the tales of her foremothers, queens who had commanded armies with the sway of a hand, women who had struck terror into the hearts of invaders without drawing a sword. These stories were more than legend, they were a map of courage, a prophecy carved in memory, waiting for her to awaken to its call. The forest, dense and shadowed, seemed to lean toward her, guiding her steps as though it recognized her purpose before she did. Birds, startled by the morning mist, erupted into cries that echoed against ancient oaks, while a distant stag watched her approach, antlers crowned like a guardian of the old world. Each heartbeat of the girl matched the rhythm of life around her, a symphony of flora and fauna conspiring to imprint the inevitability of her rise. In that silence, heavy and sacred, she understood that she was both fragile and unstoppable, a vessel for the fury of the land and the wisdom of the ages. Beyond the forest, the first signs of encroaching Rome were already visible: soldiers carving roads, scouts mapping the hills, and distant banners fluttering like warnings against the horizon. Yet she did not flinch. In her heart, the pulse of a coming storm resonated not as fear, but as a call to arm. The whispers of the forest merged with the murmur of destiny. A queen was being forged, not in the luxury of courts, but in the crucible of survival and the whisper of ancient power. Every shadow hinted at challenge, every rustle of leaf promised trial, and still she stepped forward, drawn by an unseen force that demanded greatness. At night, she would lie beneath the open sky, tracing the constellations that mirrored the legends of her people. Her father had taught her to read the heavens as both guide and warning, her mother to hear the wind as an oracle. She learned early that knowledge and instinct were inseparable, that a ruler must be both wise and untamed, capable of seeing beyond the immediate to the currents that shaped the future. Already, in quiet moments of reflection, she began to understand the balance of fear and awe that must accompany power. The delicate thread on which the fate of kingdoms rests, the court into which she would eventually step, was a place of whispers and hidden daggers. A world where loyalty was currency and betrayal always lingered behind gilded doors. Yet for now, she was free, moving among the wilds as if they were extensions of her own spirit. She learned patience from the rivers, cunning from the foxes, and courage from the storms that swept across the highlands. In every challenge faced alone, in every secret observed, her mind sharpened, her senses heightened, and her soul recognized a singular truth: to lead, one must first survive, and to survive, one must become legend. By the time the sun rose fully over the hills, painting the stones in fire gold and crimson, she had already glimpsed the path that lay ahead. It was not straight, nor gentle. It was a road forged by resistance, sacrifice, and the inexorable pull of destiny. Somewhere deep within her, a voice whispered with certainty: Rome may march, kings may falter, but she born of earth, blood, and prophecy would endure. This was the whisper of the throne, faint but unyielding, and it had found her. Thus began the life of the queen who would defy an empire, not with reckless fury, but with the quiet, relentless power of a force older than conquest itself. Every step she took in those misted hills was a heartbeat against the coming world, a promise that history would remember not the fear of the mighty, but the courage of those who dared to rise. The forest exhaled around her, the winds carrying her name in whispers too soft for Rome to hear, yet destined to echo through the ages. Her lineage was a tapestry woven from the threads of gods and mortals, kings and druids, warriors and seers. Each ancestor had left a mark upon her spirit, a spark of brilliance tempered by hardship, a whisper of magic that thrummed in her veins like a hidden current beneath a river. In the quiet halls of her ancestral home, She could almost hear their voices, long-dead queens who had walked the same stone floors, druids whose chants still lingered in the mortar, and warriors whose shadows clung to the walls like restless spirits. This was no ordinary blood. It was a living covenant between the past and the future, a legacy that demanded she rise to its full measure. From her mother, she inherited the patience of rivers and the cunning of storms. From her father, the iron will of kings and the strategic mind of a general. Yet beyond these tangible gifts lay something far older, far more dangerous. The knowledge of the old rites, the songs of power that could stir the forests, bend the weather, and shape the hearts of men. She practiced these rites quietly at first, tracing symbols in sand, whispering chants into the wind, listening as the world seemed to respond. Each murmur of leaf and ripple of water confirmed that the magic of her blood was awake, and it demanded mastery. The druids watched her with a mixture of reverence and caution. They had long predicted a figure who would reshape the lands, a woman born of fire and shadow, whose will would rival Rome itself. To them, she was both miracle and danger, a living bridge between the mortal realm and forces that ordinary men could never comprehend. They taught her to read the patterns of the stars, to interpret the songs of birds, and to speak with authority that could inspire loyalty and fear in equal measure. Every lesson was steeped in mystery, every ceremony a test of resolve, and she absorbed it all with the hunger of one who knew that destiny is claimed, not given. Even in her earliest encounters with neighboring tribes, her presence commanded attention. The whispers of her lineage traveled faster than messengers on horseback. Warriors bowed, not merely to a title, but to the aura of someone who carried generations of wisdom and power in her gaze. Her blood was a banner, her voice a call to arms. And even the elders of distant settlements recognized that this girl, small yet untamed, was the incarnation of old magic and new defiance. She did not yet wield armies, but the seeds of allegiance were sown wherever she stepped. Yet power carried its own peril. Within the sprawling halls of her family estate, jealous cousins and ambitious nobles schemed quietly. They feared the potential she represented, the fire in her eyes, the courage that defied the natural order of subservience expected of women, even queens in waiting. Assassins' whispers and poisoned wine were mentioned in hushed tones, lessons in vigilance woven into every lullaby and every meal. She learned quickly that magic was not her only weapon. Cunning, patience, and the ability to read hearts were equally essential for survival. The first true test of her bloodline's strength arrived unexpectedly. A neighboring chieftain, seeking dominance over her people, encroached upon sacred land. Without hesitation, she summoned warriors, invoked rites of protection, and orchestrated a defense that combined strategy, courage, and ritual power. When the smoke cleared, the enemy had retreated, and the people whispered not just of her courage, but of her near-mythical ability to bend circumstance itself. It was the first sign that the fire in her veins could shape reality, that her ancestry was not just a relic of the past, but a living force with the power to command loyalty, fear, and awe. Night brought quiet reflection. Beneath the sky dense with stars, she traced constellations with fingers trembling from exertion, feeling the echo of those who came before. She understood, with the clarity of both fear and exhilaration, that the path she walked was unlike any other. Each decision she made, every alliance formed or broken, would ripple across generations. The blood of kings and druids demanded not mere survival, but transformation, a shaping of the world to mirror the courage of those who bore it. By the time the moon rose over the rolling hills, her resolve was forged. She was more than a princess, more than a girl of noble blood. She was the living embodiment of her lineage, the inheritor of ancient rites, and the spark of rebellion against an empire that would soon reach her shores. Her ancestors whispered approval in the rustle of leaves, the song of the rivers, and the howl of distant wolves. The legacy of fire and magic had awakened, and with it, a destiny that no army, no decree, and no fear could extinguish. The world she was born into was a tempest, a maelstrom of tribal rivalries, political ambition, and the ever-looming shadow of Rome. Even as a child, she learned that innocence was a luxury she could not afford. The forests and hills of her homeland, which seemed serene to outsiders, were battlegrounds of whispered conspiracies, stolen livestock, and shifting alliances that changed as swiftly as the wind. She watched her father's council, where men with knives hidden beneath cloaks debated over life and death, and realized that power was rarely given. It was seized, defended, and sometimes lost in the blink of an eye. Her earliest lessons in survival came not from teachers or warriors, but from observation. She learned to read a room or a forest as one reads a story. A slight frown, a tightened jaw, a flick of the wrist, each gesture carried meaning. Every sound of the woods, every ripple across the river, every shadow in the hall of her home was a message to be interpreted. By the time other children were learning simple songs and games, she was already discerning friend from foe, measuring loyalty and calculating trust with the precision of a seasoned strategist. The threat of Rome, ever present yet distant, was a constant undertone to her childhood. Tales of legionnaires, clad in iron and disciplined beyond imagination, arrived with every trader and scout. Villages whispered of towns burned, families slaughtered, and kings deposed. These stories were never told to frighten her. They were a warning, a call to awaken her blood, and a lesson that survival required more than courage. It demanded foresight. Even in her dreams, she saw banners approaching through fog, heard the clash of swords, and felt the tremor of empires beneath her feet. Her playgrounds were often the ruins of old fortifications, their stones slick with moss and soaked with rain, where she learned to climb, to hide, and to observe without being seen. Older boys, rough and impatient, tried to test her limits, but she responded with cleverness and agility that both impressed and intimidated. Even at a tender age, her presence demanded respect. Whispers of her cleverness spread among the children of the tribe, and while she often played alone, it was never out of shyness. It was a choice born from a mind that always calculated the stakes. Yet childhood was not solely a crucible of strategy and caution. Moments of wonder punctuated her days, the sudden flight of a hawk, the silver flash of fish in a stream, the quiet bloom of wildflowers after spring rain. These instants of beauty tempered the harshness of her reality, teaching her that even in a world of fire and ambition, there was grace, there was poetry, and there was reason to fight not merely for survival, but for life itself. She began to understand that leadership was not only the wielding of power, but the capacity to see both the danger and the beauty in every moment. By her 10th year, she had already begun to develop a reputation among the elders and warriors of her people. Not as a girl, not as a princess, but as a mind and spirit whose reach extended far beyond her years. The forest seemed to bend in her favor. The rivers whispered advice, and the winds carried rumors of a child who would someday challenge the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. Each step she took through those sun-dappled woods and crumbling ruins was a step toward a destiny. Forged in fire, a destiny that would demand everything from her and reward her with legend. The horizon was no longer a distant whisper of possibility, it had grown into a creeping certainty. The unmistakable shape of legions advancing with the precision of a storm. News of Rome's conquests came like smoke drifting over hills, carrying tales of cities flattened, forests burned, and kings toppled without mercy. Every trader, traveler, and scout brought fragments of fear and awe, but to her, these fragments were pieces of a larger puzzle, a map of power that demanded respect and strategy. She began to sense, even in her youth, that Rome was not merely a distant threat, it was an inevitability, a force that would test her spirit and her people's resolve. She watched the skies and hills as if they could reveal the army before it arrived. Flocks of birds scattered at unnatural times, rivers swelled with sudden rains, and the wind carried echoes of foreign tongues across the plain. Her intuition, sharpened by bloodlines and years of quiet observation, told her that the empire's shadow was moving with both patience and precision. Rome did not stumble blindly. It conquered with calculation, and each encroachment into neighboring lands was a rehearsal for what would inevitably come to her doorstep. The elders spoke in hushed tones of the Roman tactics, their disciplined formations, their engineering feats, and their unflinching brutality. They told stories of walls breached by machines of war, of towns taken in a single day, of rulers who had fallen not through lack of courage, but through an inability to anticipate a foe that viewed every variable as calculable. To her, these stories were more than warnings, they were a challenge. The Empire had underestimated the forests, the rivers, and the cunning of those who called themselves free. And she, already mindful of every detail in her surroundings, understood that it would be her task to exploit every weakness. In the midst of preparation, the young princess studied the land as her ancestors had. Hills and valleys became strategies. Rivers became boundaries and avenues of maneuver. Forests became allies as much as sanctuaries. She began to experiment with small acts of control, learning how to rally the local warriors, how to anticipate enemy movement, and how to use the environment as an extension of her will. Even in adolescence, she grasped that mastery over territory was mastery over destiny, and that every stone and tree could be an instrument of resistance against an army that considered itself unstoppable. Rome's presence also brought whispers of fear among the common people, a subtle erosion of confidence that she recognized as dangerous. Rumors of betrayal and surrender spread faster than the legions themselves. Some sought to negotiate with the distant empire. Others fled into the forests, abandoning homes and hearths. She understood that leadership required more than bravery. It required the ability to instill courage when doubt had already taken root. With quiet determination, she began to demonstrate that defiance was possible, that the shadow of Rome could be met not only with force, but with cunning, unity, and unwavering resolve. At night, she would climb the hills overlooking her village, gazing toward the south, where the distant banners of Rome glinted in the sunday. In those moments, she felt both the weight of history and the urgency of the present. Every whisper of the wind carried both threat and opportunity. Every crack of a branch in the forest was a reminder that vigilance was eternal, and every heartbeat reminded her that the people who looked to her for guidance were counting on someone who could see beyond fear, someone who could turn the inevitability of conquest into a stage for defiance. By the time the first scouts of Rome approached the outer settlements, she was no longer merely a child observing events. She had begun to embody the fusion of wisdom, courage, and intuition that would define her reign. Her mind, honed by ancestry and experience, understood the mechanics of power, the fragility of loyalty, and the potential for rebellion that lay dormant in every man and woman of her land. Rome may have been vast, disciplined, and merciless, but she was relentless, clever, and indomitable. The empire's shadow was spreading, yet it had not yet reached her spirit. And that was where the first spark of legend would ignite. The first clash of wills was never declared with trumpets or banners. It arrived quietly, like a ripple spreading across still waters. And yet, its consequences would echo for generations. She was no longer a child, standing in the shadow of Rome. She was a leader in the making, summoned by necessity to act while the empire still considered her lands inconsequential. The encroaching scouts and tax collectors of Rome underestimated her, as all mighty powers do, mistaking youth for naivety, curiosity for weakness. They would soon discover that a single spark could ignite a conflagration beyond their reckoning. It began with whispers among the villages, subtle coordination that no Roman patrol could detect. Messengers disguised as traders carried words of warning and plans of resistance, while she moved unseen through forests and hills, studying every road, river, and ridge. Her mind, already trained in observation and strategy, saw patterns where others saw chaos. She understood that victory was never immediate. It was a sequence of calculated moves, a game of patience, and every soldier, every ally, every hidden weapon had to be placed with meticulous precision. When Rome first attempted to levy taxes and assert control over her people, the response was swift and merciless. Traps laid along the narrow passes caught unsuspecting patrols. Forests became mazes of ambushes. Rivers, manipulated by hidden channels and makeshift dams, delayed and disoriented enemy forces. Each skirmish was a lesson, both for her and for those who followed her. She did not yet have armies to face legions head-on, but she had ingenuity, cunning, and the fierce loyalty of people who understood that their land and their lives were worth more than submission. The rebellion was as much psychological as physical. Her presence alone, a symbol of courage and defiance, inspired warriors who had long been hesitant. Tribes that once quarreled among themselves now set aside rivalries to rally under her banner. The forests, rivers, and hills themselves seemed to answer to her will, as though the land recognized the bloodline that had guided it for centuries. She taught that resistance was not only about fighting, it was about vision, hope, and the unbreakable bond between leader and people. Yet rebellion demanded sacrifice. The first victories were bittersweet, marked by loss and the sobering realization that war was never clean. She saw young men fall, women forced into impossible choices, and homes burned as warnings. Each wound, each tear became a lesson, forging her resolve and sharpening her understanding of responsibility. Leadership, she learned, was not measured in glory alone, but in the courage to bear the suffering of others without faltering. Her hands, though small, carried the weight of lives and the burden of a destiny she had only begun to grasp. The first encounters with Roman commanders revealed both her audacity and their underestimation. A legion sent to punish a rebellious village found itself ensnared in traps she had devised, delayed by rivers, and ambushed along narrow paths. Rome's soldiers were disciplined, but they were not invincible. They were flesh and bone, subject to the cunning of one who knew every secret of her land. Each skirmish reinforced a singular truth. She could not match Rome in sheer numbers, but she could outthink them, outmaneuver them, and turn their confidence into vulnerability. By the time the dust settled on these early confrontations, the people began to whisper her name with reverence and awe. Not merely a princess, not merely a warrior, but a queen in spirit, whose courage had proven that defiance was possible. Rome's shadow, vast and threatening, had met its first true resistance, and the spark of legend was lit. From this first rebellion, she learned the rhythms of power, patience and timing, bravery tempered with cunning, and the eternal truth that even the mightiest empire could be challenged by those who refused to bow. The land itself seemed to recognize her, and in the hearts of her people, hope was reborn. The path of a queen is never walked alone. Yet the company one keeps can be as perilous as the enemy at the gate. As her rebellion grew, so too did the network of allies and confidants who pledged loyalty, each carrying their own ambitions, desires, and secrets. Some hearts beat in synchrony with hers, fueled by courage and devotion. Others whispered in shadowed corners, weaving plots that could undo everything she had fought to build. Trust became both a weapon and a liability, and she learned, early and unflinchingly, that betrayal often arrived where love and loyalty were assumed. One such companion was a warrior whose valor had earned the admiration of the tribes. His eyes, fierce and dark, seemed to mirror the storms that swept across their land. He followed her into ambushes and councils alike, proving both loyalty and cunning. Yet even in moments of closeness, she sensed the tension between desire and duty. To lead was to command hearts, not merely armies. And in commanding hearts, she discovered the double-edged nature of intimacy. Affection could inspire devotion, but it could also cloud judgment. Each glance, each unspoken word became a battlefield of its own. Yet even amid strength, betrayal lurked. A counselor, long trusted and often praised, revealed ambitions that clashed with the queen's vision. His whisperings reached ears eager for discontent, and his schemes threatened to fracture the fragile unity of the tribes. Confronting betrayal required precision. She could not simply punish, for doing so publicly would fracture loyalty further. She had to navigate the subtle currents of power to turn deceit into a tool rather than a weapon against her. In these moments, she learned that leadership demanded not only courage and intelligence, but the cold calculation to act before treachery matured into disaster. Love, too, was a crucible. She felt its pull as profoundly as any battlefield's fury. A fire that warmed her in moments of doubt, yet threatened to blind her in moments of choice. Affection was not weakness. It was a mirror, reflecting both desire and danger. She discovered that the heart could inspire astonishing courage in both self and others, but it could also betray with a glance, a hesitation, or a whispered word. Every relationship became a terrain to navigate, a map of trust and risk, and she began to understand that the bonds of intimacy were often as treacherous as the paths of war. Her political acumen grew alongside her emotional awareness. Each alliance was negotiated with care, each loyalty tested, each motive examined. She understood that Rome would exploit any fissure, that betrayal could be both internal and external. Even among the most devoted, uncertainty lingered, and she treated every handshake and oath as a provisional pact, to be validated through actions, not words. This blend of pragmatism and intuition became the foundation of her leadership, a principle that would define every campaign, every negotiation, and every confrontation in the years to come. Through lovers, allies, and betrayals alike, she emerged stronger and wiser. The fires of loyalty and deception forged her into a leader capable of seeing beyond immediate danger, capable of balancing passion with reason, and capable of inspiring a following that would endure through storms of both battle and intrigue. By the time the first waves of Roman retaliation reached her lands, she was no longer merely a princess or a strategist. She was the pulse of defiance itself, a force that intertwined love, loyalty, cunning, and unyielding courage into a singular, unstoppable presence. Her story, though still unfolding, carried the unmistakable weight of legend. The Druids spoke in riddles, their voices like wind weaving through ancient stones. Carrying secrets older than any kingdom, she sought them not out of fear, but out of necessity, a desire to understand the currents of fate that flowed beneath the surface of history. In the hollowed heart of a sacred grove, where mist clung to moss-covered oaks and the scent of burning herbs lingered like memory, she listened to words that both unsettled and inspired. Prophecies were never simple. They were a tapestry of possibilities, warnings, and truths wrapped in metaphor, demanding wisdom and courage to unravel. The chief druid, his eyes clouded with age and vision, spoke of a queen born of fire and forest, whose path would clash with the might of Rome itself. She will rise in shadow and storm, he intoned, voice deep as the earth, her spirit entwined with the land. Her triumphs will be carved in blood and legend, but the cost will be written in sorrow. The words struck her like lightning, neither wholly comforting nor entirely threatening, but a mirror to the life she already sensed unfolding around her. Destiny, the druid suggested, was neither gift nor curse. It was a trial, demanding mastery of mind, body, and heart. She studied the grove as much as the words themselves, recognizing that prophecy was a guide, not a certainty. Each rustle of leaf, each ripple across the river, seemed to echo the warning and promise embedded in the druid's voice. In the eyes of the elders and the hidden watchers of the forest, she saw reflections of what she might become. A leader feared and revered, shaping history while bearing the weight of consequence. The prophecy did not frighten her. It illuminated the path she had already begun to walk. Even as a girl, she understood the duality of such knowledge. Power and destiny carried a price that could never be measured in victories alone. Allies might falter, enemies might strike when least expected, and even those she loved could become instruments of fate she could not fully control. Yet, the prophecy granted clarity of purpose, a framework within which to act, to anticipate, and to endure. Every decision she made would be both guided and tested by the invisible hand of destiny, each action a note in a symphony written by forces older than empires. The druids also spoke of signs, omens to watch for, patterns to decipher, subtle marks upon the land and sky that would confirm or warn of choices yet to come. A comet streaking the night sky, an unexpected silence among birds, a river rising beyond its banks, each held meaning, each demanded attention. She trained herself to see and interpret these signs, to trust her instincts when logic alone could not suffice. In doing so, she became not only a warrior and strategist, but a reader of the unseen currents shaping her world. The prophecy touched her personal life as well. Love, loyalty, betrayal, each would be magnified, each choice amplified by the weight of her destiny. The druid's words were clear. No bond could be taken for granted, no allegiance assumed. Her people, her companions, even those closest to her heart would reflect the challenges inscribed in the stars. It was a lesson she absorbed with quiet determination. The path of power is never solitary, but it is often lonely, lined with trials that demand both resilience and discernment. By the time she left the grove, the prophecy had taken root within her like a seed of both purpose and caution. The forests whispered approval. Rivers carried a quiet affirmation, and the wind seemed to murmur her name in anticipation of what was to come. She understood as never before that her life was a convergence of blood, magic, and fate, and that every step she took would be weighed against the immense consequences foretold. The Druid's prophecy was not a warning to retreat, but a call to rise to meet Rome, treachery, and the very currents of destiny with unyielding courage. Rome approached with calculated precision, its legions stretching across valleys like an iron tide. Engineers mapped the hill, testing approaches, while soldiers cleared paths with axes and fire, confident that steel and discipline could overwhelm any obstacle. Yet the hill was not merely stone and earth. It was alive with the knowledge of her people and the wisdom of her bloodline. She anticipated every maneuver, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. Rivers redirected, hidden pits prepared, archers stationed in shadowed groves all became instruments of resistance, proof that even against a disciplined army, ingenuity could level the field. The siege began not with grand battle cries, but with quiet tension, the hum of insects silenced by the approach of thousands, the distant thrum of drums, the steady march of boots on dirt and stone. She moved among her people with calm authority, distributing tasks, encouraging vigilance, and reminding them that courage was the currency of survival. Every child, every elder, every warrior understood that the hill was not just a fortification, it was a statement, a testament to the possibility of defiance against an empire that believed itself unstoppable. Traps were triggered before the Romans could reach the main gates. Hidden stakes, pits masked by brush, and ambushes from elevated positions slowed their progress and inflicted early losses. Each skirmish was a lesson in patience and cunning. She allowed the enemy to advance only to lead them into disadvantageous positions. Rome's soldiers, trained to suppress fear, found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move, as if the hill itself conspired against them. Her strategy was precise, merciless, and elegant, demonstrating that intellect could rival brute force. Yet siege was not a war of tactics alone, it was a test of endurance, spirit, and resolve. The defenders endured long nights of attack, constant threats of fire and starvation, and the psychological pressure of facing a seemingly invincible force. She moved among them, her presence a calm amid chaos, her words steadying hearts and sharpening resolve. Every cheer, every instruction, every gesture reinforced the bond between leader and people, showing that loyalty was strengthened not by fear, but by courage shared and hardship endured together. The Romans attempted direct assault, battering gates with siege engines and attempting to flank the defenders through hidden ravines. Each attack was met with countermeasures she had devised, boiling oil from hidden parapets, rolling boulders down slopes, and archers who struck with precision from positions unseen. The enemy's confidence faltered, replaced by frustration and fear, while her people's belief in her grew. Even in the face of overwhelming numbers, the hill stood as a symbol of resistance, a living testament to the possibility of defying destiny's seemingly immovable forces. As days turned into nights, the siege became a crucible that tested every aspect of leadership, strategy, and human endurance. She understood, with clarity sharpened by fire and fear, that this battle was as much about spirit as it was about territory. Rome could take the hill with brute force eventually, but the defiance and cunning displayed here would echo far beyond its slopes, inspiring others, demoralizing enemies, and engraving her name into the hearts of those who would follow. By the time the first autumn winds stirred the forests surrounding the hill, she had learned that victory was measured not merely in holding stone walls, but in shaping hearts, minds, and the course of history itself. She moved through the forests and hills as if born of them, a figure half shadow, half commanding presence. The mists of dawn clung to her cloak, obscuring features and intent, and it was said that she appeared and vanished like a spirit of the land itself. To her people, she was more than a leader, she was a living legend, a phantom of defiance who could strike where least expected and vanish before the enemy could comprehend her presence. Her reputation grew not just from victories, but from the aura of inevitability she carried, a sense that fate itself whispered in her favor. Stories of her movements spread faster than messengers could ride. Farmers claimed to see her silhouette at the edge of forests, guiding the harvest, warning of danger, or silently surveying the land. Soldiers spoke in awe of raids carried out by forces, led by a figure whose identity was obscured by fog and shadow. Rome, disciplined and unyielding, began to recognize the danger posed not merely by armies, but by a commander who could manipulate perception, morale, and fear as skillfully as any blade. She became an enigma, and in mystery lies power. The fog became both ally and symbol. She moved through it with ease, using it to conceal troops, orchestrate ambushes, and protect her people from scouts and spies. Hidden from sight, she observed every movement of the enemy, reading formations and predicting tactics with the precision of a mind that had been sharpened by years of strategy, observation, and the whispered guidance of prophecy. Even in uncertainty, she thrived, turning the environment itself into a weapon, a cloak, and a statement of authority. Her presence inspired loyalty beyond fear or duty. Warriors followed her not only because she commanded, but because she embodied the spirit of resistance, the courage to face overwhelming force, the intellect to outmaneuver, and the calm that steadied hearts in moments of despair. Her people began to whisper that she could see the unseen, anticipate the unpredictable, and bend circumstance itself in favor of justice and survival. These whispers, carried on winds and rivers, became legend, a tale that reached even those who had never glimpsed her face. Yet the mist was not just an ally, it was a teacher. She learned to rely on intuition, to interpret subtle signs in wind, water, and earth. Each leaf that shifted, each ripple in a stream, each distant cry of wildlife became part of a network of information. She honed senses that could detect ambush, betrayal, or opportunity long before they arrived. In the fog, she discovered that perception could be as powerful as force, and patience could achieve what armies could not. The Queen in the Mist became a symbol to both her people and her enemies. To her tribes, she represented hope, cunning, and the promise that resistance was possible. To Rome, she became a phantom to be feared, a strategist who struck unpredictably, forcing legions to hesitate, scout, and second-guess themselves. Her legend, born of deeds and cultivated through perception, was more than reputation. It was an instrument of power, a force that shaped reality as much as strategy or sword. Even in solitude, the mist offered her reflection. Alone on high ridges, she could see the landscape, the villages, and the distant movements of Rome, and she understood the weight of expectation and destiny that rested upon her shoulders. The fog, bending light and sound, reminded her that the world was not fixed, that perception, timing, and understanding could reshape outcomes. She embraced her myth, not for vanity, but for its utility. Legend, she knew, could be as potent as any army in bending the will of men. The riverlands were alive with both promise and peril, fertile fields, winding waterways, and settlements stretched like fragile jewels across the landscape. To outsiders, they appeared peaceful, idyllic even. But beneath their calm surface flowed currents of politics, loyalty, and the inexorable presence of Rome. When she arrived, the land itself seemed to acknowledge her. The reeds bending in whispered reverence, the waters reflecting a leader whose presence carried both danger and hope. She did not arrive merely to hold territory. She came to imprint her vision upon it, to ignite courage where fear had settled. Her campaigns here were not acts of mindless destruction, but of calculated pressure. Villages that had acquiesced to Roman demands found themselves subtly guided to resistance. Crops removed, waterways altered, and ambushes prepared along trade routes. Fires were lit not in vengeance alone, but as warnings, signals, and tools of strategy. Rome would see the devastation and feel the fear, but more importantly, they would recognize that these were not random acts. They were the deliberate touch of a mind capable of turning environment, circumstance, and morale into instruments of war. Every engagement, every strike, was layered with meaning. Ambushes along riverbanks were timed to sow maximum confusion. Hidden crossings allowed rapid deployment of forces unseen. Villages became fortresses, not through walls alone, but through the unity and ingenuity of people inspired by her presence. She understood that fear could be wielded as effectively as hope, and that a carefully placed fire could break the confidence of legions while igniting the courage of a single village. Each flame left its mark, both tangible and psychological, and she watched the ripples spread with the satisfaction of a strategist orchestrating a symphony of rebellion. Yet the toll of this expansion weighed heavily on her conscience. Fields burned to delay legions, livestock sacrificed to deny resources, homes abandoned or destroyed for strategic advantage. These were choices that no leader could make lightly. She walked among the people, comforting those whose lives were disrupted, reminding them that their suffering was temporary, but their courage enduring. Leadership, she realized, was the art of balancing ruthlessness with mercy, strategy with humanity, and ambition with responsibility. As her reputation grew, so too did the number of allies drawn to her banner. Tribes previously hesitant or divided now aligned with her cause, recognizing that her vision was both practical and inspiring. Yet this influx brought new challenges. Differing customs, rivalries, and personal ambitions required careful management. She navigated these complexities with subtle authority, ensuring that loyalty was earned through respect and shared purpose, not fear or coercion. Her ability to unify diverse peoples became as essential as her skill with sword or strategy, marking her as a leader whose influence extended beyond the battlefield. Rome, meanwhile, adjusted its strategy in response to her growing influence. Legionnaires advanced cautiously, wary of ambushes and the cunning that seemed to permeate every forest and river crossing. Scouts reported sightings of a phantom leader moving like smoke, striking unpredictably, then vanishing into the mist. Her legend had become a weapon, shaping the perception of her enemies as effectively as her forces shaped the land. They began to question their intelligence, their orders, even the invincibility of their empire. Each hesitation, each misstep, played into her hands, turning fear and doubt into tangible advantage. By the end of the campaign in the Riverlands, she had left a mark that was both physical and psychological. Villages that had once cowered now spoke openly of defiance. Soldiers whispered her name with caution and awe. The land itself seemed to remember her passage in scorched fields, realigned waters, and the unity she inspired among her people. The fires she left behind were not mere destruction, they were symbols, lessons, and warnings. Rome might be vast and disciplined, but it was neither infallible nor immune to cunning unity and the will of one who understood that rebellion was as much about hearts and minds as it was about swords. Victory on the battlefield was only one measure of power. She learned quickly that war was not won by strength alone, but by the subtle art of influence, persuasion, and manipulation. In the candle-lit halls of neighboring tribes, she sat across chieftains whose eyes gleamed with ambition, whose tongues were as sharp as any sword. Words became weapons, smiles became shields, and promises carried the weight of both hope and threat. Each conversation was a duel, each gesture a strategic move, and she conducted these delicate battles with a poise that belied her youth. Alliances were fragile, easily shattered by greed, fear, or deception. She observed the smallest cues, the hesitation in a handshake, a fleeting glance, the shift of posture when a rival was mentioned. Every detail mattered, for trust was the most valuable and most dangerous currency in a world where betrayal could arrive cloaked in friendship. She forged pacts not only with gifts or threats, but with demonstration of foresight and strength. Her victories had to prove not only her capability, but her vision, showing that siding with her was as wise as it was courageous. Rome's emissaries arrived, their faces blank masks concealing both confidence and calculation. They offered treaties, tributes, and veiled warnings, expecting her to bend under the weight of the empire. But she had learned the rhythm of diplomacy. Listen, measure, wait, and strike when advantage revealed itself. She countered their words with questions that exposed intentions, gestures that subtly shifted perception, and calculated agreements that bought time while strengthening her position. Each interaction was a chess move, each silence a tactic, and the eyes of her people watched for her signal of resolve. The tension between diplomacy and war became a daily negotiation. She understood that showing weakness could invite invasion, but showing excessive force could fracture alliances. In secret councils, she debated with advisors, testing the morality, practicality, and consequences of every decision. Rome might command armies, but she commanded hearts, fears, and hopes. In the interplay of shadows and words, she realized that cunning often outweighed swords, and that a mind unyielding could bend the course of empires. Intrigue was a constant companion. Spies and double agents moved like ghosts between villages and camps, their loyalty as fluid as rivers. She turned deception into advantage, feeding false intelligence to Rome, planting seeds of doubt among potential traitors, and using the anticipation of conflict to unify disparate tribes under a common cause. Every whispered rumor, every carefully placed message became part of a larger strategy designed to preserve freedom and buy precious time for the inevitable confrontation with the Empire. Love and loyalty intersected with diplomacy, complicating both personal and political landscapes. Allies sometimes demanded more than she could give, and companions tested the limits of her patience and judgment. She discovered that leadership required the skill to navigate human emotion as deftly as battlefield tactics, knowing when to console, when to challenge, and when to assert authority in a way that bound loyalty without inspiring resentment. Each relationship became part of the web she wove, delicate yet unbreakable when handled with precision. By the end of these tense exchanges, she had established not only alliances, but respect. Her reputation extended beyond her immediate followers into lands that had yet to be touched by her forces, carried on the whispers of traders, scouts, and observers. Rome may have believed that it controlled the narrative, but she understood the truth. Perception could be as decisive as force. In shadows of diplomacy, she shaped a network of influence and strategy that made her more formidable than any legion could anticipate. A leader whose mind was as lethal as her sword and whose presence alone could alter the balance of power. The Empire had noticed. Rome, vast and unyielding, would not tolerate defiance, no matter how cunning or invisible it seemed. Legions were dispatched with renewed vigor, banners fluttering like iron thunderclouds over hills and plains. Their approach was relentless, engineered to crush resistance through discipline, numbers, and sheer intimidation. Yet she did not flinch. Every move, every feint, every path she and her people had prepared was a response to this inevitable reckoning. Rome would test her strength, but she had already turned the land, her blood, and her mind into weapons of defiance. The first legions arrived under a gray dawn, disciplined, marching in unbroken columns, their armor clinking in unison as though the world itself had been turned into a metronome of conquest. Her scouts observed the advance, noting every formation, every supply line, every flaw in the seemingly perfect machine. The rivers and forests, once quiet allies, now became battlegrounds. She orchestrated ambushes with precision, striking at vulnerable flanks, cutting supplies, and retreating into terrain the Romans could not command. Each clash was a lesson, each maneuver a statement. Rome may be vast, but it was not invincible. The river crossings became a theater of ingenuity and desperation. Hidden channels, hastily constructed dams, and submerged obstacles delayed the legions, forcing them to split and regroup under constant harassment. Archers struck unseen from cliffs and wooded banks, while cavalry exploited every weakness in formation. The terrain itself seemed to rise in defense, as if the land recognized its champion. In the chaos, she moved like smoke, her presence felt but rarely seen, directing the course of battle with the calm authority of one whose ancestors had long mastered the rhythms of survival and conquest. Yet this counterattack was brutal. Villages along the frontier suffered under Rome's wrath, scorched in reprisal for resistance, their inhabitants fleeing into forests or into her protective command. She bore the cost of every strike with quiet determination, knowing that leadership demanded the endurance of sorrow alongside triumph. Her people learned that courage required sacrifice, and she became the living embodiment of that lesson. Losses hardened her resolve and taught her that even victories would be measured not in glory alone, but in the lives saved, the spirits inspired, and the principles upheld. The legions brought engineers, siege engines, and relentless discipline. The forests and hills that had concealed her strategies became battlefields of attrition, where every advantage had to be rethought, every movement recalculated. Yet even against such methodical force she adapted. Guerrilla tactics, rapid strikes, and psychological warfare slowed the Roman advance and frustrated commanders who were trained to expect linear conflict. Rome may have held the power of numbers, but she held the advantage of terrain, instinct, and intuition honed over years of survival and study. The psychological toll on Rome's soldiers was as effective as any physical attack. The whispers of her presence, moving unseen through misted forests, orchestrating ambushes, and vanishing before retaliation, infected the ranks with uncertainty. Fear, subtle and insidious, crept into disciplined formations, Leaders questioned intelligence, scouts doubled back, and the rhythm of conquest faltered. She understood that terror, carefully controlled, could be wielded as effectively as a sword, and she used it to magnify every victory, no matter how small. By the time the first waves of this renewed offensive ebbed, the land bore the scars of battle, yet she and her people remained unbroken. Rome had struck, tested her cunning and endurance, and revealed the price of resistance. But they had not defeated her. Instead, the empire had been forced to acknowledge that defiance could persist, that the will of one determined leader could shape the tide of conflict, and that even the mightiest army could meet its match not only in skill, but in ingenuity, courage, and the unyielding bond between a queen and her people. Victory breeds envy, and loyalty is often tested in the crucible of power. As her influence grew, so did the eyes of those who coveted it, who resented her command, or who sought their own ascendancy in the shadows. Friends became cautious observers, allies whispered among themselves, and even the most trusted advisors carried the seeds of doubt. She had learned early that the gravest dangers were not always at the front of battle, but within the walls of councils, in the murmur of confidants, and in the silence of those closest to her heart. The first signs were subtle hesitation here, a misdirected message there, a glance that lingered too long with suspicion. One of her earliest companions, a warrior whose valor had once been unquestioned, began to act in ways that undermined her strategy. Supplies were mismanaged, instructions ignored, and rumors seeded among the villages she sought to protect. At first, she observed quietly, gathering proof, weighing motives, and tracing the ripple of actions that threatened the fragile unity of her rebellion. To confront betrayal prematurely could fracture trust. To ignore it could invite catastrophe. In secret councils, she tested loyalties with precision, arranging situations that revealed hidden intentions without exposing her suspicion. A missing messenger would appear in Rome's hands, only to be traced back to a trusted lieutenant. Questions posed in quiet conversation elicited truths disguised as casual remarks. She became an expert in reading the human heart, understanding that deception is rarely complete, that the smallest misstep can betray the largest schemes. Her bloodline, her upbringing, and her instinct combined to forge a mind capable of anticipating treachery before it fully materialized. The betrayal struck at the most vulnerable moment. A minor settlement, previously loyal, was compromised, allowing Roman forces to enter with little resistance. The loss was not massive, but it carried symbolic weight, a reminder that even the cleverest strategy could be undone by the unseen hand of ambition or fear. She moved quickly, stabilizing the settlement, repairing the defenses, and rooting out the agents responsible, all while maintaining morale. To her people, she was calm, unwavering. To her enemies and traitors, she became an unpredictable force, a storm that punished deception as swiftly as it rewarded courage. Personal bonds were tested as well. Those closest to her friends, confidants, even a fledgling love found themselves caught between loyalty to her and fear of Rome, ambition, or self-preservation. She did not respond with rash anger. Instead, she wielded patience, subtlety, and calculated pressure. Relationships were a battlefield of their own, requiring strategy, empathy, and the courage to act when deceit crossed the line of survival. She learned that ruling a people required not only command over armies, but mastery of human nature itself. The lessons of betrayal were not purely punitive. She discovered that even deception could be harnessed, redirected, and used to advantage. A traitor could become a double agent. Misinformation could manipulate enemy movements. Divided loyalties could be transformed into alliances through demonstration of foresight and fairness. She embraced the duality of human ambition, understanding that leadership was a continual negotiation between fear, respect, and hope. Every betrayal strengthened her judgment, sharpened her strategy, and reinforced the necessity of vigilance at all times. By the end of this turbulent period, she had not only rooted out treachery, but transformed its lessons into weapons of wisdom. Her people's loyalty was tested and proven. Her enemies recognized her cunning, and her own understanding of power deepened immeasurably. Shadows of betrayal remained, as they always would, in the hearts of ambitious men and women. But she had become a master of the unseen currents that threatened empires. The legend of the Queen, who could see into the hearts of allies and foes alike, spread like wildfire, a force as potent as any sword or spear in the ongoing struggle against Rome. Winter arrived like a living enemy, draping the land in white and ice, slowing rivers, hardening roads, and testing both body and spirit. The legions of Rome pressed harder, taking advantage of weakened supply lines and the fatigue of her people. Cold, hunger, and exhaustion became as formidable a foe as any sword. Yet she moved through the frost with unbroken resolve, her presence a lantern of courage for those who looked to her, not merely for leadership, but for the very will to endure. Each frozen dawn was a battlefield, each snowdrift a challenge of survival as much as strategy. Her people suffered, but despair found no refuge here. Fires burned in small settlements, not merely for warmth, but as symbols of hope, vigilance, and defiance. She ensured that morale was tended as carefully as food and weaponry, walking among her people in rain, snow, and sleet, reinforcing courage with words, actions, and presence. They followed her into the cold as they had followed her into ambushes and sieges, inspired by the certainty that she would never abandon them and that their suffering would not be meaningless. The Roman commanders believed that winter would break her rebellion, that frost and deprivation would turn allies into deserters and force her to surrender. But she understood the terrain, the forests, and the rivers as extensions of her strategy. Hidden paths allowed for secret supply lines, small raids on enemy depots fed her forces, and ambushes along frozen roads inflicted casualties without exposing her people unnecessarily. Each movement was deliberate, each action calculated to demonstrate that resilience, cunning, and understanding of land and climate could defeat even the mightiest army's assumptions. Winter amplified both danger and opportunity. Storms that slowed the legions concealed her strikes. Rivers iced over to create unexpected crossings. Fog and snow became her allies in deception. She taught her warriors to read the weather as a guide, to anticipate the movement of enemy forces, and to turn the elements themselves into tools of strategy. Even in hardship, she found the rhythm of advantage, transforming adversity into a weapon as lethal as any blade. The hardships also tested loyalty. Starvation and fatigue challenged courage, sowed doubt, and tempted betrayal. She addressed this not with force alone, but with empathy and inspiration. She reminded her people of the legacy in their blood, the vision of freedom, and the consequences of submission. Her words were measured yet impassioned, every gesture a reminder that the land, the ancestors, and the cause demanded endurance. In this crucible, bonds were reforged, and trust became unbreakable. By the end of the Winter of Blood, her legend had grown beyond geography or fact. Stories of her endurance, strategy, and unflinching courage reached villages untouched by her presence, spreading hope to the oppressed and fear to the oppressors. Rome recognized that victory would demand not just armies, but a mind capable of anticipating her every move. She had transformed the harshest season into a proving ground, showing that resilience, intelligence, and unyielding spirit could defy even the coldest winter and the mightiest empire alike. The strengthening of loyalty, setting the stage for renewed campaigns. Two forts stood sentinel over a narrow valley, their walls rigid and unyielding, symbols of Roman order and discipline. They had long dominated the region, controlling trade, rivers, and the movement of armies. To assault them directly would be folly. To bypass them would risk leaving a strategic choke point in enemy hands. She studied their placement with the patience of a sculptor examining stone, noting every line of sight, every supply route, every weakness born of human habit rather than architectural perfection. She understood that victory would require both intellect and audacity. Her first move was subtle, a network of scouts and informants feeding false reports into the enemy's ears. Patrols were lured into ambushes along wooded paths. Skirmishes staged to mislead the forts about the size and intentions of her forces. Small fires were lit in distant fields to draw attention, while secret routes allowed her troops to maneuver unseen along the valleys and ridges. Each action was designed not to defeat the forts immediately, but to manipulate perception, creating hesitation and doubt within the disciplined ranks of Rome. The attack, when it came, was a symphony of deception and precision. Archers struck from elevated positions, targeting officers to disrupt command, while hidden cavalry cut off supply lines and intercepted reinforcements. Siege engines of her own design, modest yet effective, forced the defenders to divide attention between multiple threats. Every movement was orchestrated, calculated, and timed to maximize the psychological impact as much as the physical. She knew that the mind of an enemy is often more vulnerable than the walls of a fort. Despite the meticulous planning, the battle was brutal. The forts were not merely structures, they were symbols, and the soldiers defending them fought with discipline hardened over decades. Losses were inevitable, and each was felt deeply by her people and by her. Yet she did not falter. Every setback became a lesson, every casualty a reminder of the stakes, and every skirmish reinforced the need for strategy over recklessness. Her ladyship became a beacon of focus and resolve, transforming grief into determination and fear into courage. She employed the terrain itself as a weapon. Slopes were used to roll boulders, forests concealed movements, and rivers were redirected to flood approaches or mask advances. The defenders, trained to fight in predictable ways, were forced to contend with chaos born of understanding and foresight. Her ingenuity turned the natural world into an extension of her command, making every advantage tangible and every move of the enemy predictable, or at least manipulable. In the heart of the siege, she demonstrated another aspect of leadership: adaptability. When one flank was pinned, she shifted reserves to exploit gaps elsewhere. When morale faltered, she appeared among the warriors, her presence a reminder of purpose and inevitability. Her tactics combined calculation, intuition, and personal courage, creating a force multiplier that made her army seem larger and more potent than it was. Every decision, every movement, revealed a mind capable of outthinking, outmaneuvering, and ultimately outlasting the Roman garrison. By the time the twin forts fell, one by careful siege, the other by negotiated surrender under pressure, the valley had been transformed. Rome's symbols of control were dismantled, the rivers and roads reclaimed, and her people's confidence had grown immeasurably. Her legend expanded with the story of the queen who could topple walls without overwhelming force, who could turn intelligence, cunning, and resolve into weapons sharper than any sword. The siege of the twin forts became not merely a military victory, but a testament to the intellect, strategy, and indomitable will of a queen destined to challenge an empire. Rome had endured enough embarrassment to awaken a fury unlike any it had felt before. The loss of the twin forts was not merely tactical. It was a wound to pride, a challenge to the empire's sense of invincibility. Legions converged from distant provinces, their banners casting shadows over forests and rivers, their discipline honed to a razor's edge. This was not a patrol or a skirmish, it was a reckoning. Rome intended to crush defiance in a single, coordinated strike, to make an example of the queen who dared disrupt its unbroken chain of conquest. She anticipated their fury, predicting movements before messengers could even report their positions. Scouts and spies carried intelligence like threads woven into a tapestry she alone could read. She understood that brute force alone would not suffice. The enemy would bring overwhelming numbers and meticulous coordination. Her response was multifaceted. Feints to misdirect, ambushes to bleed strength, and the strategic use of terrain to turn every valley, ridge, and river into a labyrinth that favored those who knew it intimately. Every river bend became a trap, every ridge a watchtower, every forest a shield. The first encounters were devastating to Rome. Legions marching in confidence found themselves strung along narrow valleys, harassed by hidden archers and cavalry striking with terrifying precision. Supplies vanished into the night. Ambushes struck with unerring timing, and every attempt to consolidate was met with tactics she had rehearsed countless times in her mind and on the land. Rome's soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, now faced unpredictability, fear, and frustration that no discipline could fully counter. Her genius lay not in brute force, but in turning chaos into advantage. Yet the counterstrike was relentless. Rome's commanders adapted, probing for weaknesses, testing defenses, and exploiting fatigue. Villages loyal to her were threatened, burned, and plundered. The hardships weighed heavily on her people and on her. Each act of violence reminded her that leadership was measured not in victories alone, but in the endurance of hardship, the preservation of spirit, and the ability to maintain hope when despair threatened to dominate. She moved among the wounded and weary, offering words, plans, and presence, reminding all that courage was a choice, and that surrender was never inevitable. Psychological warfare became as crucial as physical strategy. Stories of her intelligence, her cunning, and her presence in the mist circulated not only among her followers, but through captured scouts and whispered rumors among Roman ranks. Fear began to take root, subtle yet pervasive. Soldiers questioned orders, commanders second-guessed strategy, and the perception of her omnipresence amplified every setback. She understood the potency of legend, of being more than human, and wielded it as carefully as any weapon. Even as Rome intensified, she adapted. Ambushes were layered, movements calculated to stretch supply lines, and reserves deployed in unpredictable ways. Every battlefield became a chessboard, each decision weighed against multiple contingencies. She displayed a mastery of both patience and timing. Strike too early, and opportunity is lost. Strike too late, and the enemy regroups. Her ability to balance aggression with caution transformed a numerically inferior force into one capable of facing legions head-on or outmaneuvering them entirely. By the end of the Roman counterstrike, the landscape bore the marks of relentless warfare. Yet she remained unbroken, her forces resilient, her legend solidified. Rome had struck with fury, precision, and scale unmatched, but they had underestimated her knowledge, adaptability, and unyielding will. The Queen had turned the tide of the counterstrike into proof that empires, no matter how vast, could be challenged, delayed, and reshaped by those who refused to submit. Her story became inseparable from the land itself, a tale of defiance, intellect, and courage that would echo far beyond the battlefield. In the heart of a hidden valley, beneath the shelter of ancient oaks and the quiet murmur of a river, she convened a council unlike any before. Leaders from allied tribes, advisors whose loyalty had been tested and proven, and even those whose motives were uncertain gathered in shadow and silence. This was not a meeting of convenience, but of necessity, a crucible in which the future of rebellion, freedom, and survival would be forged. Every voice, every hesitation, every glance carried weight, and she presided over it with a presence that demanded both respect and vigilance. The council was a balance of diplomacy, strategy, and revelation. Each leader brought grievances, ambitions, and suggestions. Each advisor presented intelligence, forecasts, and options. She listened, questioning, challenging, and occasionally silencing with the sheer force of insight. The room was alive with tension, every word a potential spark for either alliance or fracture. She had learned through battle and betrayal alike that even in victory, human ambition could threaten unity as effectively as any legion. The art of leadership, she realized, lay in shaping these voices into a cohesive force without crushing the individuality that made them valuable. Alliances were renegotiated, old grievances addressed, and new pacts forged. She deployed psychological strategy as deftly as battlefield tactics, subtly revealing knowledge of duplicity, loyalty, and hidden motives. Those who sought to undermine her were confronted not with anger, but with calculated exposure, their ambitions redirected toward the collective cause. In doing so, she transformed potential threats into instruments of cohesion, proving that the mind could conquer internal chaos as surely as it could repel external armies. The council also confronted external pressures. Rome's emissaries and spies had infiltrated networks, and misinformation threatened to sway opinion and morale. She demonstrated the subtlety of counterintelligence, revealing to allies the sources of falsehood and ensuring that trust remained intact. Every revelation was measured, every disclosure intentional. In this way, she turned shadows into clarity, uncertainty into strategy, and fear into collective resolve. Her people began to see that the Queen's power extended beyond the battlefield. It reached into the very minds of those who would oppose or aid her. Within this council, she also faced the most personal and delicate of challenges, reconciling love, loyalty, and ambition with the needs of rebellion. Trusted companions revealed fears, desires, or unspoken doubts. Lovers hesitated at decisions that could cost lives. Advisors pressed for paths that were morally and strategically complex. She navigated these human currents with intuition sharpened by experience, balancing empathy with command and ensuring that the cohesion of her coalition remained unbroken. Leadership, she knew, was as much about understanding the hearts of people as commanding armies. As strategies were debated and plans refined, The council became a reflection of her own mind, disciplined, multifaceted, and vigilant. Maps were studied with meticulous care, routes considered for both offense and retreat, contingencies prepared for betrayal and misfortune. Each decision was layered with foresight, every proposal weighed against the knowledge that Rome's legions were relentless, that betrayal lingered in the shadows, and that even the land itself could be as unpredictable as human nature. By the council's conclusion, unity had been forged in the crucible of discourse, debate, and revelation. Plans were laid for coordinated strikes, defenses reinforced, and intelligence networks expanded. Her leadership was no longer merely about guiding armies. It was about shaping minds, hearts, and destiny itself. The Council of Shadows became a testament to her growing mastery of both war and diplomacy, a clear signal that the coming battles would test not only strength and strategy, but wisdom, perception, and the indomitable will of a queen whose legend had become inseparable from the land she defended. The plains stretched like a golden ocean under the summer sun, deceptively calm before the storm of war. Smoke from distant fires already hung in the air, warning both friend and foe that nothing in this land would remain untouched by conflict. Rome's legions advanced in disciplined formations, confident that sheer numbers and steel could overwhelm any resistance. Yet she had learned that the heart of battle was as much psychological as physical. The burning plains would be her proving ground, where intellect, courage, and vision would collide with the might of an empire. As dawn broke, the first skirmishes erupted along riverbanks and hedgerows. Cavalry struck from flanks hidden in tall grass, while archers rained precision fire from unseen positions. She moved with them, not as a distant commander, but as a presence among warriors, every glance, every command, every subtle signal guiding the rhythm of combat. The plains, once passive, became an instrument of strategy. Rivers diverted to slow enemy advances, terrain manipulated to channel forces into disadvantageous positions, and ambushes timed with a precision that suggested preternatural foresight. Rome responded with discipline and brutality. Siege engines rumbled across the plains, attempting to crush resistance through artillery and intimidation. Legions formed lines of steel, shields locking, spears bristling, the ground vibrating beneath their unified advance. Yet each movement was anticipated, each formation exploited. Her tactics were dynamic. When Rome tightened its grip, she drew them into traps. When they regrouped, she struck from unexpected angles. The plains became a living chessboard, with every movement carefully calculated to maximize effect while minimizing risk to her people. The human cost was immense. Fires consumed fields and villages alike, armies clashed with deadly efficiency, and warriors fell on both sides. She bore each loss with solemn acknowledgement, moving among the wounded, tending to morale, and reminding all that courage was forged in adversity. Victory was never abstract. It was earned through endurance, intelligence, and the unyielding willingness to confront suffering without faltering. Her presence became a symbol of resilience, a living proof that leadership demanded sacrifice alongside brilliance. The heat of the day brought new challenges. Smoke and haze distorted vision, dust-choked lungs, and the clash of steel became almost indistinguishable from the cries of the wounded. Yet she leveraged the chaos, turning confusion into advantage. Signals were hidden in smoke, movements concealed beneath dust clouds, and ambushes struck with devastating effect. Every sense was honed to the rhythm of battle, every intuition sharpened by years of experience. The plains themselves seemed to bend to her will, responding to strategy as much as obedience. Psychological warfare intensified. Rome's soldiers began to whisper of a queen who moved like a phantom, directing forces from the mist and fire, appearing and disappearing at will. Fear became a weapon, uncertainty a tool, and morale a battlefield in itself. Even disciplined legions found hesitation creeping into their ranks, commanders doubting their intelligence, and soldiers questioning the inevitability of victory. The legend she had cultivated now operated as a force multiplier, shaping reality as surely as swords and arrows. By nightfall, the burning plains would transform. Fires blazed across the horizon, the bodies of the fallen marked the intensity of conflict, and the land itself bore witness to a battle fought not only with weapons, but with intellect, courage, and the unrelenting will of a queen whose vision refused to yield. Rome had struck with precision, power, and rage, but she had endured, adapted, and triumphed once more. The plains would be remembered not just for blood and fire, but for the demonstration of strategy, leadership, and spirit that elevated her from mere commander to legend. The eagle, Rome's emblem, had long cast its shadow across the lands she sought to protect. Its talons struck fear into villages, its wings carried the weight of empires, and its presence symbolized the inevitability of conquest. Yet on this fateful day, she confronted it not with despair, but with determination forged over years of strategy, hardship, and relentless preparation. The battlefield was vast, stretching from river valleys to rolling hills, and every inch would become a testament to courage, cunning, and the clash of destiny with ambition. The legions advanced in unbroken formations, their armor gleaming like polished stone under the sun, banners snapping in disciplined unison. Generals, confident in centuries of military doctrine, assumed that sheer force and coordination would crush resistance. But she had studied them, predicted their movements, and crafted a strategy that would turn predictability into vulnerability. Every ridge, river, and forest became a tool. Every ambush, distraction, and diversion meticulously orchestrated. She did not merely fight the soldiers, she fought the empire's confidence, arrogance, and presumption of inevitability. Initial skirmishes were fierce and calculated. Cavalry struck unexpectedly from flanks. Hidden archers rained arrows upon officers and supply lines, and smaller contingents executed feints designed to divide the Roman focus. Rome's discipline slowed its advance, but it did not falter completely. Yet with every engagement, her forces gained insight, adapted swiftly, and exploited even the slightest hesitation. The battlefield was a living entity, shifting and responding to her will, and each maneuver reinforced the notion that she was not merely a commander, but a master of the interplay between chaos and order. The turning point arrived at the river crossing, a choke point meticulously prepared. Hidden stakes, camouflage ditches, and strategically placed artillery turned the advance into carnage. Rome's legions, confident in their training, found themselves ensnared in traps they could neither anticipate nor evade. Panic rippled through their ranks. Commanders shouted orders that arrived too late, and the unrelenting precision of her tactics shattered the illusion of invincibility. The eagle faltered, its wings clipped by strategy, patience, and the indomitable will of a people, led by a queen who had become legend. Even as triumph loomed, she remained vigilant. Rome had learned from prior defeats, and the specter of betrayal and overconfidence haunted every movement. She moved among her warriors, her presence a steadying force, ensuring that victory would not dissolve into chaos or recklessness. Every soldier, every companion, every ally understood that the final confrontation demanded not only strength, but clarity, focus, and the unwavering commitment to the greater cause. Leadership, she knew, was as much about guiding minds as commanding bodies. The clash reached its zenith as the eagle's standards fell, captured by forces who had moved with precision, courage, and insight. The fall was both literal and symbolic. Rome's emblem, once untouchable, now lay in the hands of those who refused submission. The impact was immediate. Across the battlefield, morale surged among her people and allies, while despair and disbelief rippled through the enemy. The impossible had been achieved not by luck, nor by simple strength, but by foresight, strategy, and the indomitable resolve of a queen who embodied the spirit of resistance itself. As the smoke cleared, and the battlefield settled into the echoes of victory, she surveyed the landscape not with triumph alone, but with reflection. Losses had been immense, sacrifices irrevocable, and the path forward remained uncertain. Yet she had proven a truth that would echo far beyond this day. Even the mightiest empire could be challenged, even the most disciplined legions could be tested, and even destiny itself could be shaped by courage, intellect, and unyielding will. The fall of the eagle was not merely a military success. It was a declaration, a legend, and a testament to the power of one determined queen against the forces of history. The battlefield lay quiet now, smoke rising in slow spirals toward a sky that seemed to acknowledge the struggle beneath it. The rivers, scarred and swollen from conflict, reflected not only the sun, but the endurance of those who had fought, suffered, and survived. She walked among her people, her gaze steady, absorbing the weight of victory and loss alike. Every footstep carried the memory of sacrifices, the cries of the fallen, and the unbroken courage of those who had chosen defiance over submission. In this stillness, the past seemed to breathe, alive in every stone, tree, and scar upon the earth. She had transcended the title of queen. She had become a symbol, a legend woven from intellect, bravery, and the unshakable will to resist. Stories of her deeds would ripple across lands, whispered in villages untouched by her presence, carried on the wind and in the memory of those who dared to dream of freedom. Her people understood that victory was not merely the absence of enemy forces, but the cultivation of hope, unity, and resilience that could withstand even the mightiest empire. History, they realized, was not written solely by conquerors. It could be reshaped by those who refused to bow. The empire, humbled yet unbroken, retreated with lessons etched deep into its discipline. Rome's soldiers and generals would speak of her with caution and awe, of a leader who seemed to anticipate every move, turn every disadvantage into an advantage, and forge loyalty where fear had once ruled. The queen's genius had turned strategy into art, battles into legend, and defiance into inspiration. Across the lands, she had demonstrated that courage, intelligence, and vision could bend the arc of history, even against forces that believed themselves eternal. In the quiet of her stronghold, surrounded by allies and confidants, she reflected upon the path that had led her here. Betrayal, hardship, love, and loss had all carved themselves into her mind and spirit. Every trial had taught her that leadership demanded both wisdom and courage, that legends are born from endurance as much as victory, and that true power lies in shaping hearts as well as commanding armies. She understood that the past is a living teacher, and that the present is the canvas upon which legacy is painted. The rivers, forests, and hills that had witnessed her rise now seemed to recognize her presence, as if the land itself remembered the courage and vision she had infused into every stone, stream, and path. The people who had followed her were no longer mere subjects. They were bearers of a story, participants in a living history that would echo long after the battles were done. Every child who played among these lands, every elder who recounted tales by firelight, carried fragments of her spirit, ensuring that the memory of defiance, resilience, and intellect would endure. Even in victory, she remained mindful of impermanence. Empires rise and fall, rivers change course, and people grow old. Yet she understood that the essence of her struggle, the courage to resist, the wisdom to lead, the vision to inspire, was eternal. Legends are not only remembered for deeds, but for the emotions, choices, and ideals they awaken in those who hear them. The queen who had defied Rome was no longer merely a figure of flesh and blood. She had become an idea, a force, a spark of the past that refused to be extinguished. Her final reflection was of continuity, the past flowing into the present, and the present shaping the future. She realized that every story of courage, every act of defiance, and every lesson of survival is not lost to time. History does not merely belong to those who write it, but to those who live it, shape it, and carry its echoes forward. In her eyes, the battles were more than conflict, they were proof that the human spirit, guided by vision and courage, could bend even destiny to its will. As the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across the hills and rivers, she knew that her legacy was secure, not in monuments or titles, but in memory, inspiration, and the hearts she had shaped. Her people would carry it forward. Her story would be told in whispers and songs, and the land itself would bear witness to her triumphs. History, she understood, is never finished. It waits for those bold enough to engage it, to challenge it, and to rebirth it. Because the past is never truly gone. It's waiting to be reborn.